two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Jorge DeFendini and Grace Mausser, both longtime electoral activists, I think, and all of us DSA members. I am going to be asking about ranked choice voting. I have been curious about this sort of thing since in DSA in 2019, there was a passionate controversy over different voting systems. Now, those were actually the systems that DSA should use in its own internal elections, but nevertheless, it left me curious because it didn't seem to me. Anyway, then last year in Ithaca, a petition was sorted calling for ranked choice voting, which seemed to be what you might say people who considered themselves progressive, or even not all that progressive, considered the best system for public elections, elections of public officials. By the way, also, just recently, in these times, which usually is very much, you know, good sense, had a little side article calling ranked choice voting, the big idea and touting it. And that inspired me to write a letter to the editor in which I said, if it is so wonderful, how come New York City used ranked choice voting and got Mayor Eric Adams, who has now been accused of all sorts of corruption? And that is really where I want to investigate today. So, Grace Mausser, tell us about the New York City mayoral election of 2021. Was that the first one that used ranked choice voting?
Yes, it was. So 2021 was the first New York City election that used ranked choice voting. I actually have a bit of a history with it because I worked for the Charter Revision Commission in 2019 that instituted ranked choice voting in the city. One thing to note in New York City, which is a bit different than most other cities in the US that have used ranked choice voting, or RCV as I may call it, throughout this. We only use it in primary elections. The city does not use it in general elections. So it's a big deal coming, this year again, coming into the June primary election. It was used in the 2021 June primary Democratic election, but it was not used in the November general election. So that's something to note, and I can come back to that. Um, but yes, it was adopted by the Charter Revision Committee in 2019, ratified by voters that year, and then went into effect for the first in the first subsequent city election, which was 2021.
I suppose, well, Jorge DeFendini, you may be the perfect person to explain about some differences between politics in New York City and politics here in Ithaca.
So a little bit different in Ithaca. I will say though, we are a almost radioactively glowing blue dot in a sea of red up here in upstate New York, which you might find some commonality with New York City. Our city council is all Democratic. which I think might be you guys still have Vicky Palladino on the city council. She's a Republican, right?
We do have a small cohort of
Yeah, yeah.
Republicans, though to be fair, I think our city council is quite a bit bigger.
Right, yes. And so we politics here actually skew fairly liberal and progressive here in Ithaca, but we are a smaller city with with different constraints, typically in the budget and financial capacity uh, arena, which I think color a lot of the politics. But you'll see a lot more people who normally would be Republicans, I think, running as Democrats in Ithaca's arena of politics than you probably would in New York City. Although New York City definitely has their fair share of corporate Democrats, to I'm sure Gracie's chagrin. But I think that would be a big difference here is that we seem to be a lot more of a one party city, I would say, but it's a very, very big tent.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I would say, for instance, in as recently as 1995, a so-called independent beat the left-wing Democrat in a
Mhm.
mayoral election.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah, and I think a lot of that can also factors into our size as well, where a city of our size can, deal with sort of funny situations where independents can sort of do that. You see this in Buffalo as well with the writing campaign that defeated India Walton, the DSA endorsed Democratic nominee for mayor in Buffalo. A few years ago. So smaller cities that have smaller thresholds for victory with fewer people voting do welcome that in. And then the other thing would probably be the strength of our Democratic committees. Our Democratic committees here up in Ithaca are not the most durable or strong, and have over the decades, I think, been somewhat hollowed out. There are still good people organizing and doing good work in them, and of course, in at large in the Democratic Party. But in terms of committee organize operations and organizing, you know, we don't have an operation akin to Hakeem Jeffries in Brooklyn, for instance. So it's a little different in that regard as well, which definitely influences races like the Democratic primary, for instance.
yeah. Well, another odd thing that we have here is cross endorsements.
Mhm.
Back in the 90s and for several years into this millennium, um, we had a beloved county clerk, Aurora Valenti, who was endorsed. I think she was registered Republican and
Mhm.
first arose as a Republican
Mhm.
and was endorsed by the Democrats and, continued for years to be cross-endorsed by both parties.
Right.
Now, another thing here is that we just elect all sorts of things. I mean, the smaller towns elect their highway superintendents. The county elects its sheriff.
Mhm.
Uh, These are all, I guess, essentially appointments,
Mhm.
the corresponding positions in New York City.
Yeah.
So there are all sorts of differences.
Mhm.
So, what was the picture in 2021? In the primary election, how many candidates were there, and what was the range of positions?
Well, so 2021 generally was a huge election year because in addition to the mayoral race and Bill de Blasio being term limited, so it was open, there was also over half of that city council was term limited. So there were, probably 35 open city council seats across the city, in addition to the mayor's seat and the comptroller's seat. So two big citywide races as well. There were so many elections. That was also the first year that like I said, that we used ranked choice voting. So in addition to open seats, encouraging lots of candidates, I think ranked choice voting combined with New York City's public matching program that makes it more accessible for a lot of candidates to run for office, just resulted in a huge field of candidates for seats up and down the ballot. I couldn't name all of the candidates for New York City mayor in 2021, but the big ones were, of course, Eric Adams, Catherine Garcia ended up being one of his most serious challengers. Andrew Yang was a big name for a while. And Maya Wiley was sort of seen as the progressive choice. There was briefly kind of a leftish challenger, Diane Morales, who ended up kind of crashing and burning internally. Same was true of Scott Stringer, who is now running again for mayor. He was seen as a serious progressive-ish challenge, but then was plagued by sort of sex pest allegations that tanked his campaign in the middle. So, in addition to all the regular political drama, there were a lot of candidates.
And let me just say that you named a couple of names at the beginning. Out here, we don't know who these people are.
That's okay.
So
You don't
perhaps,
need to know most
well, it
of
might be
them.
useful to go back and just say, a
I go as
leading.
far as to say it seems like a lot of New Yorkers also shared that same opinion based
Yes.
off of the election results.
I mean, I think maybe the most important people to know were, of course, Eric Adams, who won, Catherine Garcia, who was running as a sort of moderate counter to Eric Adams. She was the commissioner of the sanitation department and sort of running as like a moderate technocrat type of candidate. Maya Wiley was, I believe she was best known as a MSNBC kind of political talking head figure. She was running as a progressive candidate. And then Andrew Yang, who ran for president, I'm sure you know, sort of a conservative kind of third way. I mean, not quite
Not
conservative,
left,
not
not right, forward.
yeah, yeah, whatever that means. Like a tech guy who brought that energy. He's important because when he was eliminated, he and Catherine Garcia were the only two candidates who made an agreement and cross-endorsed each other. So and we saw that was actually effective in the case of those two candidates. So when Andrew Yang was eliminated, as in the rounds of tabulating the votes, a majority, well, at least a good chunk, I'd have to double check on the exact numbers of his votes transferred to Catherine Garcia, which boosted her performance in the overall vote counts. This was particularly notable because in the first round of ranked choice voting, Maya Wiley, the first winner, or the first, not winner, the person with the most first place votes was Eric Adams. The person with the second most votes was Maya Wiley. But through the rounds, Catherine Garcia actually overtook Maya Wiley. So in the final round, Catherine Garcia was in the number two spot, and Eric Adams maintained the number one spot. I'll also take this opportunity just to say ranked choice voting can add add a lot, give voters more options in many cases. But in the vast majority of elections, the person who wins the first round of votes, i.e., the person who gets the most first choice picks, ends up winning the election anyway. So it is different and there can be upsets, but that doesn't happen most of the time. So it's not changing elections so much, but just giving voters more options in a lot of cases.
What did the ballot look like? I mean, how many people had to rank how many candidates?
So all the
About how
all
many candidates were there?
all the candidates that qualified through petitioning were listed on the ballot. In New York City, you can only rank five of them. So in some cities, you can rank as many candidates, or you can rank as many candidates as there are. So I would guess there were probably like 10 candidates. I could double check that.
Doesn't matter.
But you can only rank five in New York City. So some cities have limitations on how many candidates you can rank. Other cities let you rank as many candidates as are possible. But the limits on being on the ballot were just what they are in a typical election, which is if you qualify via petitioning, then you will be on the ballot.
Okay, so that bit is not so different even from the situation here. I mean, I think we remember the Anna Kellis' first assembly race in the primary. There were seven candidates.
Yes, exactly. Races that are crowded will still be crowded. You could argue that there might be more of an incentive to try your hands, and I think we'll see some evening out of that as we get more experience with RCV in New York City. But um, there's definitely I think people don't know how to pull ranked choice voting quite yet. People are still trying to candidates and validators and groups that endorse are still trying to figure out what exactly RCV means for how they should negotiate. So I think for at least a few cycles, it will be something that encourages more people to get involved. In part, and I think this is a positive quality of RCV because it eliminates the idea of a spoiler. Right? Like you're not if you're running to the far left and there's a conservative running, a moderate can't tell the leftists, you're gonna spoil it and the conservative's gonna win because theoretically a voter who's a leftist might rank the left candidate, the moderate candidate, and perhaps not rank the conservative candidate. So it does eliminate some of that tension.
But still, even five candidates, I'm thinking it would be hard for me, for instance, to memorize how I mean to rank five candidates. I suppose, though, when we have our elections, often there are people just beyond the 100-foot limit handing out little cheat sheets.
Oh, yes.
And I suppose one could make up one's own in advance and put it in one's pocket. Once you're in the privacy of a booth, you can't, they can't stop you from pulling a little piece of paper out of your pocket.
I
Now,
mean, oh, sorry, go ahead,
correct me if
Jorge.
I'm wrong. I was going to say, but I do believe I've seen quite a bit online, like some of our comrades in California, for instance, doing incredible voter guides that they post on social media. These aren't always, and I don't know if they have a first past the post system or ranked choice voting, but I always see them sort of come out around election season that I definitely know that folks use as like guides to help inform them of how to vote on certain, basically here's your ballot, here's how we would approach it, and providing that to the public at large.
Well, but I'm saying it's one thing to provide something online or piece of paper or whatever in advance of the election, away from the election, and another thing to actually memorize it
Correct.
and carry it, which I think is challenging to some memories.
Mhm.
But I'm saying you can make your notes, I think, on a little piece of paper and carry that with you. And could you perhaps, Grace Mausser, describe a bit what the campaigns were like? I mean, for instance, did each individual stick to their own campaign, or were there kind of sort of slate campaigns?
So in 2021, there were not slate campaigns. The only people who attempted that were Catherine Garcia and Andrew Yang, who cross-endorsed. And we actually, when you look at how the votes panned out, that did boost Catherine Garcia once Andrew Yang was eliminated. And I think was probably instrumental in Catherine Garcia moving up and kind of becoming um, the number two candidate. as the rounds of vote tabulation continued. This year, in 2025, there's more talk about a slate and approaching it with that in mind. There was recently, I think last month, there was an article where the Working Families Party, WFP leaders talked about their slate strategy. I might frame it more as kind of an anti-Adams, anti-Cuomo strategy. There's a lot of, I mean, Eric Adams has not dropped out, is planning to run as far as we can tell. There's also a lot of chatter about former disgraced Governor Andrew Cuomo getting into the race. Um, so WFP is trying to orchestrate, some might call it a slate, maybe it's a pact that you're not trying to attack each other or focusing your energy, the candidate's energy on Cuomo or Adams. But WFP is trying to hold a lot of that work, in part because I think they're really the only organization that has the relationships and clout across the very broadly defined left to do so. Um, so you see, I mean, and for example, Zohran Mamdani, who is of course endorsed by New York City DSA for mayor, has talked publicly about not attacking other candidates in the race. So he's not expending energy on attacking candidates like Brad Lander or Zelnor Myrie or Jessica Ramos, who are all also running for mayor and are, I think, trying to find their lane somewhere between moderate and socialist. But they're all trying not to attack each other, or at least for now. We'll see how much that holds. But instead, focusing the energy on Adams. And I think if Cuomo gets involved, that would be a formidable, formidable challenger.
Turning back, still trying to get a picture of what actually happened in 2021. What other races were on the primary ballot at the same time?
So a lot of city council races that depended on your district, of course, and the comptroller's race, which is also a citywide race. And then there were several borough president races. All of these races, every citywide race has RCV at the during primary elections. So they all had ranked choice voting. I think to your previous point about, how can you remember how many people to rank or things like that? It's you don't have to rank all five candidates, right? If you only know one candidate and you only like one candidate, you can just vote for that one candidate if that's what you want to do. So you don't have to fill out all five in every single race, especially as you were saying, Ithaca, upstate counties, upstate towns generally have a lot more positions that are open for election. You don't, I'm not sure that every voter needs to be filling out five rankings for highway manager or whatever position you were talking about. That might just not be necessary or feasible for most people's level of political knowledge. Um, so there were a lot in 2021, there were a lot of options, there were a lot of candidates. A lot of people, a lot of voters only filled out their ballot partially, only voted maybe for one candidate or two candidates that they knew they liked rather than filling out their ballot to the maximum.
Okay, well, that's interesting that that's allowed because it seems to me that I think in some internal DSA elections, like for a national political committee, if you did that, your ballot would be invalidated. Now, again, internally in DSA, if you're at a national convention and you turn in an invalid ballot, somebody comes running after you and says, "Hey, fix this." So you don't totally, it's not pure suicide to do it, but you do have, the rule was that you had to fill out everybody. That was a sort of rank. No, it
That
wasn't done as rank. I can't remember now. I don't think it was actually done as ranked choice voting.
I
I think,
believe that was single transferable vote, which is a form of ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is sort of an umbrella term that can mean a lot of different systems. But I believe the NPC vote was done according to STV, or a single transferable vote.
Yeah.
um, well, I mean, another complete difference is that those votes, you weren't just electing one person. You
Yes.
might have a slate of, you might be electing 8 out of 10 or something like that.
Yes, that's a good point, and something that frustrated me in 2021 in New York City. I think especially a lot of organizations forgot. So with ranked choice voting, you can vote for multiple people, but only one person wins the seat, right? That part hasn't changed. So sometimes when there's discussions, New York City DSA should consider endorsing multiple people or put out guides suggesting voting for like various rankings. I personally have always been opposed to that because our model is about getting someone into that seat and then governing and with them. So you have to build a relationship with the potential future elected over time through the campaign. It's not, to me, a DSA endorsement is not just who do we like, it's not just who do we think would do a pretty good job. It's about choosing someone that we think we would govern with. And so it's important to keep in mind that even if there's someone you're okay with winning that seat, you only one person holds that seat. So if you're using your power as an organization, I still would think DSA, even in ranked choice voting, should only endorse one person, and it should be the person that they want to actually hold the seat.
That's a lot to think about still, I see, because there's more than one way to do ranked choice voting, apparently. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. Thank you, Jorge DeFendini. Thank you, Grace Mausser. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.